Hello, this is clip 2 in the MGT 600 Topic 7 Managing Change series. You need to watch clip 1 first. If you haven't, then please do that and then come back to this clip. So continuing the lecture, there are 3 types of change. First, we have development change, to do better than or to do more of what already exists. So this is the most basic type of change. This is considered to be fine-tuning. It's basically saying, well, we have a system that pretty much works, but there are things that we can improve, or we can do more of certain areas. We can be more productive in certain ways. So how do we go about doing that? This is the most basic and wouldn't really take an ODC, Organizational Development and Change Management Initiative, to change this. This might just involve some training within the company. We then have transitional change. This is where we take old systems and we replace them with new. For example, changes in services, quality technology, maybe changes in workforce. This is usually quite localized. It can be simple change applied across the organization, say for example a new computer system, but it's not organization-wide change that is highly disruptive. So this could be, and usually is, the introduction of new technology. It may be the outsourcing of a department or the downsizing, say, for example, of a specific department, but it's not considered to be organization-wide change. Then we have what is primarily what we're dealing with here today, which is transformational change. This is the most radical form of organizational change. It is reconceptualization of the organization's mission, their vision, their culture, their critical success factors, their forms and structures and leadership. So it's wide change across the whole organization. This is what requires these sort of initiatives. I've mentioned in previous classes, but this is the first time I'll mention this in this lecture, the research done by Bain & Co. So Bain & Co. is one of the big 4 management consultancy firms that is internationally based. It's truly international, has branches all around the world. These operatives are effective in going into companies around the world and helping them improve, helping them become better companies. They have, because this is their area of expertise, they have been doing research in conjunction with academic institutions for many years now. That research looks at the acceptance of change, so the application of change and how much of that change actually sticks, so remains in place once the change agents have actually left. And the research is not very optimistic. It basically shows that about 80% of change doesn't stick. So that means that people will change when the change is applied, but once the pressure to change is removed, then there is a tendency for staff members within that company to reverse that change, to go back about 80% of the way to the way things were previously done before the change was applied. So obviously that means if I'm paying as a CEO, if I'm allowing or allocating budget towards change initiatives, I want return on investment. So I want my money to be well spent to produce tangible outcomes for the organization. If I'm going to invest in something and then I'm only going to get about 20% of what I expected to happen, then that just doesn't sound like a very good investment, a very good return on investment to me as a CEO. However, as we've mentioned, there is an absolute necessity to change. So I'm stuck in a bit of a quandary. I need to change, I have to be able to change, but the change that I'm applying is not very successful. Hence the growth in popularity of the study of change as a discipline. So I need that change, I need it to stick. So how do I get that change to stick? This is where companies like Bain & Co., like McKinsey, like Accenture, and like Boston Consulting Group, among others, have really studied to try and improve the acceptance of change within organizations. And we'll get on to some of the ways in which that takes place. So there's 3 perspectives on change, as we've just mentioned. You've got your developmental change, very simple change. What are we doing? How can we make it better? How can we apply some sort of change to improve the way that we function as an organization? Transitional change, well, we're doing something this way now. We want to do it a different way in the future. let's come up with a strategy, a project, say for example, to take us from where we are to where we want to be in this specific area. And then you've got transformational change. And as this diagram tries to illustrate, this is not something that's really linear. This is something that can be quite chaotic. So birth, growth to maturity, and then chaos. This can often happen with companies that get stuck in their ways, maybe death or maybe even re-emergence if we are successful in applying change to a new, maybe even new highs as an organization. So change strategists, these are leaders and visionaries, the initiators of change within organizations. So they're concerned with the relationship between organizations and the environment. When we say environment, we don't primarily mean the natural environment, although obviously that could be very important. If I am a resort company that operates primarily in the Maldives, say for example, then one of the biggest things that I'm going to be concerned with, I might be wrong on this, but I seem to remember that no point in the Maldives is more than about 3 meters above sea level. So with rising sea level due to climate change, the thing I'm going to be concerned with very strongly is that climate change. If I don't, as an organization, adapt to that climate change, then there goes my properties. I don't get to survive as a company. But that's not usually what we're dealing with. When we talk about the environment, we're talking about the industry, we're talking about the market, we're talking about the competition. Okay? So as a change strategist, I'm concerned with this. I'm concerned with aligning and creating the importance of the company within this environment. If we look at triple bottom line strategies, they're very much about creating a company identity and importance of the company within the environment. To provide a vision to integrate the two and design strategic plans to implement it. So where are we now by comparison to the environment? Where should we be by comparison to the environment? How do we get from where we are to where we need to be? What plan will take us there to achieve that end result of us being in much better harmony with our external environment? Change implementers, agents, and champions are responsible for the micro dynamics of the day-by-day change effort. So this is, how does this actually be applied? How is this actually applied within the organization? It's no use coming up with grand plans that when they're applied just immediately fail, that they go off track and the change is not successful when the attempt is made to apply it. So day to day, how do we apply this change successfully within the company? And then once it's been applied, how do we get it to stick? As we've mentioned before, a very, very important factor. This role is traditionally associated with middle managers. So people at the top of the company, these are the ones who are the change strategists. Then you have the change implementers. They take the change. Now, that's not to say that they're not involved in the plans for creating the project to apply the change within organizations. They may well be, usually within their own area of expertise and influence, though. So if this change were to be applied, what do you think would be the best way to apply it within your department? Is it the best change? Is there ways that we can improve the change initiative that we have proposed to achieve even better outcomes or to achieve even better acceptance? Okay. How do we then apply this within your department? What's the best practical way? So again, trying to get the buy-in from the staff members, getting those middle managers not just to do their job and apply the change because they've been told to, but to really embrace the change, to support and be behind the change, would increase the likelihood of that change initiative being successful in its application. Then you have change recipients. So these are the changees. Their actions or reactions crucially determine success or failure of change. Their role emerges towards the end of the change process. So again, we've talked about change initiatives now not being something that is thrust upon the company quickly. That tends to be the urgent reactive organizational transformation initiatives, which can be essential for a company's survival in traumatic times, but they don't have the element of plan change that ODC initiatives do have. So what we're talking about here is the strategy for identifying what change is necessary, for creating the change plans, for then getting the change implementers involved in identifying how those plans could be applied best within their own scope of control, And then once that has been identified, the change is then applied, usually incrementally. And what I mean by that is section to section, not all at once. So one section, the change is applied there. How well that change is accepted, how well it sticks, is closely monitored. The initiative is then improved to then be applied in the next section and the next section and the next section of the company, with pressure kept on the initial sections to ensure that the change sticks, that it stays in place. And this is where it gets a bit more complicated, and any continuous improvement loops that have been built into the end of that change are also followed through on. They're not just given lip service, they're actually supported, and the enthusiasm of the general staff is kept up, so that continuous improvement loop starts to proliferate. So the changees, their role emerges towards the end of the change process. Typically, they are not invited to participate in either the conception or implementation of the change. And the main reason for this is that they don't have the macro perspective necessarily of how the change applies to the whole organization. That's not to say that we don't identify, when applying change in companies, we don't identify some of the main influencers that are down at the changee level, so the front line of the company. There is a requirement to account for politics in companies. Sometimes you have people who don't have what's deemed as a legitimate power, so they don't have positional power within the company, but they have very strong influencing power with regards to other employees. So these sort of people need to be identified and won over. They need to believe in the change. If these people believe in the change and not resistant to the change, the chance of the other employees accepting the change strongly increases. So winning those people over is essential, but generally the changees are not really invited to participate in the conception and the implementation of the change. While there are more recipients, however, change efforts get confined to upper and middle level organizational ranks. So the challenge of change. The definition here, change in its broad sense, is planned or unplanned as a response to pressures and forces. There is no universal agreement on the magnitude of the change, the time frame and the implications of the forces. And one part of the organization might perceive reasons for change while other sections may not. And this is one of the biggest challenges that you might face as an ODC practitioner coming into a company to try and initiate change. One essential part of that company might need to desperately change to remain relevant within the market. And those people within that department might be very aware of the fact that they need to change, and therefore the resistance drops right down, allowing for the change initiatives to work in that department. However, other departments, say for example the accounting department, the distribution department, might say, well, we're doing our job well, we're achieving our goals, we're hitting our key performance indicators. So why do we need to change? These other guys, yes, maybe they need to change, but why do we need to change? Because they can't necessarily see the macro picture and how that change across all the departments is essential for organization-wide change. They can become somewhat resistant to change. So how do you know when to change? Organizations can institute a change when things are going well, so fine-tuning, as we've discussed, when results are fixed, transitional, when there's a full-fledged crisis, transformational. Some argue that change can only be introduced when there is a genuine crisis, while others believe in manufacturing a sense of crisis to create an atmosphere of change, an atmosphere that is willing to change. There's arguments against both of those points. I would say that the best time to change and become more current as an organization is not when you're in crisis, but well before you get there, to be able to be proactive, to look into the future and say, if we don't change, if we don't adapt now as a company, then we're going to be in crisis. Avoids all the loss of resources, financial, human, etc., that we will suffer if we allow the organization to get into that point of crisis. So the intelligent thing to do would be to foresee that, to foreshadow that, and to apply ODC strategies to bring the company in alignment before it gets there. One thing's for certain, when to change involves an exquisite sense of timing. Have we started too soon or too late? There is a bit of a tendency with some companies to accept the fact that they will be followers. So they will be ideally close to the groundbreakers in areas. So they allow the more dynamic companies, the risk-taking companies to change first. And then once those companies have started their change, they observe how those companies' change initiatives are welcomed, either externally or internally, so within the company or outside of the company with the market. And once they see success there, they very rapidly follow the same path. They start changing themselves. There's logic to this because the groundbreakers, those who go first, the cost is generally much higher. Now they get the advantage of being first, but the cost to identify what is the right and the wrong change lies on them much more than it does on those who follow. So if you are a close follower, you don't necessarily get the advantage of being first. Well, you don't get the advantage of being first, but you don't have the risk or the cost associated with identifying what change should be, what new change should be pursued, and then creating the groundbreaking strategy to pursue that change. That's not to say that being first isn't the best strategy. In some circumstances, I'm sure it is. So enabling change. How do we enable the change to be effective? Some key questions before implementation. Okay? So we really need to identify the scope of the change, the depth of the change, the driving force of the change, what supporting structures there are to help with the change, how we're going to communicate the change outside of the organization and inside of the organization, and at what pace we're going to apply this change. All of these questions need to be clearly identified, answers to them need to be clearly identified before we can really design the best change strategy to apply within the company. So pace, first things first, the time frame in which to plan and design the program. At what speed should the program unfold? How much room is there for trial and error learning? How much time do you have to respond to the driving forces, the customer needs and the competitive demand? I mean, the interesting question here as well is how much disruption will the change produce to the organization? Not something to be taken lightly. There have been circumstances, I was actually personally at a company where this took place, where dramatic change applied quickly within a company was so disruptive that it killed the company. So the company went into receivership because it couldn't handle the organization-wide change that was ineptly applied to that company, and it killed the company. The company was not doing well beforehand, but a more incremental approach to change might have allowed it to adjust from where it was to where it needed to be. But the organization-wide change just was something it couldn't respond to, and the company is no longer in business. So there is a risk there. The scope, so how large or small should be the change, how to carry out the action research necessary to identify how big or small the change should be. And the depth, how far can a large-scale change go to ensure maximum impact? How do you deal with resistance? Important question that we'll get to in a minute. How much high risk versus reward factors are involved in the change? So again, there is a massive risk when applying change in organizations. The question here is how much risk are we willing to accept for the rewards that we can gain from changing. Sometimes that's taken out of our hands with simply the fact that if we do not change, then we become irrelevant. We disappear as an organization, so therefore there is the pressure to change. But there is obviously a risk involved, and that risk can't be ignored. Publicity, how loud, how long, and how much can the organization publicize? Should it be visible via speeches, banners, newsletters, roadshows to create the hype and excitement? The expectation is that everybody will be motivated and committed. There is a problem. The problem with this approach is that it raises expectations that are high already and leaves itself to criticism with little room for flexible adjustment. There is a strong argument to be made for quiet, understated introduction that controls resistance, allows for mistakes in learning, and moderates expectations. That's not to say that there should be zero media campaign, but it is better to under-promise and over-deliver. So it's better to be quite quiet about the promises that are made, quite controlled about any promises that are made. And then as things start to really kick into gear with the change, as the change starts to produce the outcomes that it was applied to create, then the media campaign can start to be increased, can be hyped up to then show the successes of the change rather than make promises initially. So supporting structures, what mechanisms does the organization have or put in place to further the change effort? Some care and nurturing will be needed. We'll get into one of the most renowned theoretical models that is applied, the real initial theoretical model that was created to identify this problem of change being applied and then things going back to how they were before the change was applied. And that's something called Kurt Lewin's force field model. But this is one of the models that really identifies the necessity of supporting structures to keep that change in place once it has been applied. So the continued pressure for change after the change has been applied, not just before and during. Driving force, so who drives the change? Who should initiate the change? What should be the role of the sponsors of change within the organization? So just clarity in who's going to be doing what. So reacting to change, how to deal with resistance to change, which includes issues such as inertia. So inertia is people just saying, well, this is how we do things. We're comfortable with this. We perform as expected according to job descriptions or key performance indicators that we've had up to this point. We're comfortable. Okay, so why should we change? My job role involves doing what I do. You're asking me to do more than that, and that can produce some sort of resistance. Confusion and the threat of loss of control. I mean, the obvious elephant in the room here is that a lot of staff will be saying, well, will I survive? Will my job within this company survive the application of this change? And that's not a question to be scoffed at. In fact, that is something that is usually primary on the minds of those who are having change initiatives applied at their organization. Very often change initiatives will be about making companies more effective, more efficient, introducing new technology, introducing maybe even automation. And all of these things can result in the reduction of the required jobs in companies making more revenue with less employees. That could well mean that jobs or even whole departments might disappear from organizations. So people asking that question, asking the question, will I survive, will my job survive this change, is a fair question that needs to be addressed in an honest way. So collective decisions to maintain status quo and culture. This is also an important question. If certain elements of the culture are right, then the disruptive nature of the application of change can disrupt those positive elements in companies. So this needs to be identified, and these parts of positive culture need to be protected to a certain extent. Whereas negative areas of the culture, obviously that can be a big part of why we apply these change initiatives to overcome these negative areas. Efforts to block the organization from understanding the gravity of the problem. Often you can get this tribalism, this feudalism within the departments within the companies who know that, especially the heads of those departments might know that if change is applied, then the knowledge that these people weren't necessarily doing the best they could have been doing might come to light, and in which case their position within the company becomes tenuous at best. So changing things, new products and technologies, exploration, cooperation, entrepreneurship within the organization. And this is the direction we're trying to head in. We sometimes use the term intrapreneurship as something that we try to create within companies. This is trying to create a sense of ownership, a sense of excitement, that kind of startup culture within companies. To try and get that in established companies is very hard, but can make them very dynamic. So all sorts of things that we're trying to produce in organizations. So 3 innovative strategies for new products and technologies: exploration, creativity, experimentation, and ideas incubators. Cooperation, horizontal coordination mechanisms. Horizontal. So that is another thing where you've got different departments that don't really work well with each other. And part of what we're trying to do here is to create synergies. So to create the sharing of information and better cooperation amongst departments in the organization to produce synergies, to produce new initiatives. Customers and partners to, again, blurring the boundaries between us as an organization and those who supply to us, those we work with, in concert with, and even to our customers, to create more of an integrated whole that is more dynamic, and to allow for open innovation within the organization. That idea of failing often and failing early, because if you have this, then you have a system that produces new things more effectively. So allowing for that sort of culture. And this is one of the big meccas, if you will, of change initiatives, because a lot of companies get stuck in their ways. This is working for us, so therefore we're going to protect it, we're going to enshrine it, we're going to keep doing things this way, but that doesn't allow for new initiatives. So trying to become a company that welcomes new initiatives is a change to organizational culture that some people try to pursue with change initiatives. And then entrepreneurship. So ideas champions, new venture teams, skunkworks. Skunkworks is an interesting term. This again is that startup culture where you've got the acceptance, the embracing of people trying new things, trying completely new, wild, fun projects to identify new ways of doing things, to be innovative. So if we look at companies like 3M, they really pioneered this kind of idea, but lots of other companies have embraced it, where you get things like 20% time, where the engineers can take a day out of their week to work on their pet projects, things that they specifically find interesting or have created themselves, rather than have to do specific tasks that they've been assigned by their supervisors. And then having new venture funds. So money put aside not just to do things that are obvious within the company, but to invest in things that might well fail. But if they succeed, then they'll be innovative. All right, that's the end of the second clip that I'm going to do for this lecture. I will be doing a third clip as well, so please make sure that once you've finished watching this clip, you look for video 3, the link should be underneath, and you watch that. Thank you.